How did sailors sleep at sea? Months without seeing land.
What if tonight was the last night you ever slept in a bed that didn't move? Picture this for a moment. You close your eyes tonight in a warm, quiet bedroom. The mattress beneath you is perfectly still. Outside, distant traffic hums softly, lights glow through nearby windows, and everything feels familiar. Now imagine opening your eyes tomorrow morning, only to discover that your bedroom is gone. Instead, you're lying aboard a small wooden sailing ship, surrounded by an endless ocean. No land, no islands, no coastline, no buildings, no signs of civilization in any direction, just water, endless water stretching all the way to the horizon. No city lights after sunset. No cars passing in the morning, no home waiting for you after a long day's work, only the sea. As impossible as that sounds today, this was everyday life for countless sailors throughout history. Many spent months crossing oceans without seeing land even once. Some spent years moving from one continent to another, never knowing exactly when they would finally step onto solid ground again. Yet there's one surprisingly ordinary question that rarely crosses anyone's mind. How did they sleep? For us, sleeping feels almost effortless. We lock the doors, turn off the lights, lay our heads on a soft pillow, and within minutes, we're asleep, out in the middle of the ocean. Nothing was ever that simple. A sailing ship never truly stopped moving, even during the calmest weather. Long ocean swells gently lifted the vessel before lowering it again, over and over, as though the sea itself were breathing beneath the hull during rough weather. Every wooden plank seemed alive. The timbers groaned, the ropes strained against the wind, the rigging creaked overhead, and waves pounded endlessly against the sides of the ship. The sound never stopped, the movement never stopped. Yet despite all of it, sailors slept. Not only did they sleep, they slept well enough to survive journeys lasting months across oceans that many people feared to cross. The truth is, sleep wasn't simply another part of the day. It was every bit as important as knowing how to read the wind, navigate by the stars, or steer the ship through dangerous waters without proper rest. Mistakes happened, and at sea, mistakes could be fatal. When European ships began making long voyages across the Atlantic and into the world's great oceans during the 15th and 16th centuries, sailors entered a way of life unlike anything we experience today. A ship wasn't simply transportation. It became an entire floating world. Everything happened aboard. People worked there, ate there, recovered from illness there, argued there, celebrated there, and somehow they also slept there. Life was lived inside a space far smaller than most people imagine. Forget the spacious cabins shown in modern movies. Those belong to captains or wealthy passengers. Ordinary sailors had nothing like that. Most slept below deck in spaces so cramped they could barely stretch their legs. Some squeezed themselves between cargo crates and storage barrels. Others slept beneath low beams where a grown man couldn't even stand upright without hitting his head. The air below deck was heavy with moisture. The smell of damp wood mixed with salt water, tar, rope fibers, smoke, and the scent of clothing that had been worn for weeks without proper washing on warm nights. The lower decks became suffocating. Fresh air was almost impossible to find by today's standards. Very few people would willingly spend even a single night there, but the human body has an extraordinary ability to adapt, especially when exhaustion leaves it no choice. An ordinary sailor didn't work an 8-hour shift before relaxing for the evening. His day never truly ended. He raised sails, pulled heavy lines, scrubbed the deck, repaired damaged equipment, watched the weather, adjusted the rigging, loaded supplies, and responded to whatever the sea demanded next. Every single day, week after week, month after month. Eventually, something remarkable happened. The body stopped resisting. Little by little, the endless motion of the ship became normal. The gentle rocking that once made newcomers seasick gradually became comforting. It became part of everyday life. In fact, many experienced sailors later discovered something completely unexpected after finally returning home. After spending months asleep aboard a constantly moving ship, lying in a perfectly still bed on land felt strangely unfamiliar. Some couldn't fall asleep. Others woke repeatedly throughout the night. It wasn't because they missed the ocean itself. It was because their bodies had grown so accustomed to the ship's gentle rhythm that complete stillness suddenly felt unnatural. The sea had quietly retrained the way they slept, and there was another surprisingly clever reason sailors managed to rest so well despite living on a moving ship, instead of sleeping on ordinary beds. Many crews relied on something much better suited for life at sea. Canvas hammocks, simple pieces of heavy fabric suspended between two sturdy beams inside the ship. At first glance, they hardly looked comfortable, but appearances were deceiving whenever the ship rolled with the waves. The hammock rolled with it, instead of being thrown from side to side across a wooden bunk. The sailor remained balanced inside the fabric, almost as if he were resting inside a protective cocoon, even during rough weather. The hammock naturally adjusted itself to the movement of the vessel. It dramatically reduced the chances of rolling out onto the hard wooden floor on calm nights. Its gentle swaying felt almost soothing. Some sailors even claimed it was more comfortable than sleeping in an ordinary bed. For many of them, the hammock eventually became home. But no matter how comfortable a hammock became, a sailor couldn't simply sleep whenever he wanted. The ocean had no concept of working hours. There was no whistle signaling the end of a shift, no weekends, no evenings off. A sailing ship had to remain alive every minute of every day, whether the sun was shining overhead or the crew was surrounded by complete darkness. Someone always had to be awake. Someone always had to be watching the sea. Someone always had to be ready if the wind changed without warning. To make that possible, crews developed one of the most demanding schedules in history. The entire day was divided into rotating watches. Each group of sailors was assigned specific hours on duty, while another group rested. When one watch ended, another immediately took its place. The cycle continued through the day, through the night, and across the weeks and months that followed. The ship never slept, neither did the routine that kept it alive. For many sailors, a full night's sleep simply didn't exist. Instead, they learned to survive on shorter periods of rest scattered throughout the 24-hour day. They might sleep for a few hours before midnight, wake for watch duty, return to sleep before sunrise, then still another hour later in the afternoon whenever their schedule allowed. At first, the rhythm felt brutal. The human body naturally wants a predictable cycle. Life at sea offered the exact opposite. Yet, just as their balance adapted to the moving deck, their internal clocks slowly adapted to the demands of the voyage. Eventually, sleeping in short intervals became second nature. To understand just how different life was aboard these ships, imagine stepping onto the deck for 100 years ago. There were no digital clocks, no watches strapped around anyone's wrist, no alarms ringing through the cabins. In fact, many ordinary sailors couldn't tell you the exact time of day. Instead, bells marked the passing of each watch, and every member of the crew instinctively knew when it was time to work and when it was finally time to rest. When a sailor's watch ended, he wasted almost no time. He climbed below deck, found his hammock, and lay down immediately. Sometimes he carried an extra piece of cloth to protect himself from the cold sea air during the night. Sometimes he didn't even remove his boots. Most of the time, he slept in exactly the same clothes he had been working in. There was a simple reason for that. At sea, emergencies never announced themselves in advance. A powerful gust of wind could strike without warning. Dense fog could surround the ship within minutes. The captain might suddenly order the sails adjusted to avoid damage or take advantage of changing winds. When that happened, every available sailor had to reach the deck immediately. There was no time to get dressed, no time to wake up slowly, no time for comfort. That constant possibility changed the very nature of sleep itself. Unlike the deep, uninterrupted sleep most of us enjoy today, sailors often rested with part of their awareness still quietly listening. Somewhere beneath their dreams, they remained alert, listening for hurried footsteps overhead, listening for shouted commands, listening for the captain's voice cutting through the darkness. Over time, this became almost instinctive. Experienced sailors developed an astonishing ability that amazed many visitors who sailed with them for the first time. They could fall asleep almost instantly. They had learned something modern sleep experts still recognize today. When the body is pushed to its limits, it wastes no opportunity to recover. If a sailor had 30 minutes to sleep, he slept. If he had 2 hours, he slept. There was no lying awake waiting for the perfect moment, no scrolling through distractions, no unnecessary thoughts. The instant his head settled into the hammock, his body seized the chance to rest. Old journals written by sailors describe men drifting into deep sleep only moments after climbing into their hammocks. The endless physical labor of life at sea made exhaustion stronger than almost everything else, stronger than the noise, stronger than the movement, stronger than discomfort. Yet not every night offered even that small luxury. There was an enormous difference between a peaceful evening beneath clear skies and a night when the weather began to turn. The first warning signs were often subtle, a faint whistle weaving through the rigging, a breeze growing slightly stronger, the sails snapping with sharper force, the ship beginning to lean just a little farther than before. Then came the waves. At first they struck gently, then harder still. The wooden hull groaned beneath every impact. The rope stretched tight. Lanterns swung wildly from their hooks within minutes. Everyone aboard understood the same thing. The weather was changing. Rest ended immediately. Orders echoed across the deck. Men scrambled from their hammocks. Lanterns illuminated faces already slick with seawater. Some sailors climbed high into the rigging despite the violent motion beneath them. Others hauled heavy ropes with every ounce of strength they had left. Every sail had to be secured. Every loose object had to be fastened down. Every mistake carried consequences, because storms never waited for anyone to finish sleeping. For sailors, storms stole more than peace and quiet. They stole sleep itself. Imagine trying to close your eyes while the floor beneath you rises and falls without warning. Imagine hearing massive waves explode against the hull every few seconds. Imagine the ship's timbers groaning under incredible pressure while the wind screams through every rope overhead. It wasn't simply noisy. It felt as though the entire ship had become a living creature struggling against the sea. During nights like these, sleep came only in brief fragments, a few precious minutes of rest, a violent crash against the hull. Eyes open again. Another short attempt to sleep, another interruption, again and again. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of all was what happened after weeks of living this way. The impossible slowly became ordinary. The sounds that once kept new sailors awake all night gradually faded into the background. The creaking wood became familiar. The crashing waves became almost comforting. Even the constant movement of the ship slowly disappeared from conscious thought. Some experienced sailors later admitted something almost impossible to believe. After months at sea, complete silence made them more uncomfortable than the sound of the ocean ever had. On the calmest nights, when the wind softened and the sea finally relaxed, life aboard the ship took on an entirely different rhythm. The day's work was over. The sails had been trimmed, the ropes secured, the deck cleaned. One by one, the sailors climbed below deck, slipped into their canvas hammocks, and allowed their exhausted bodies to surrender to sleep. Above them stretched low wooden beams darkened by years of salt, smoke, and seawater. Around them, dozens of other hammocks hung only inches apart, gently swaying back and forth in perfect rhythm with the ship. Outside, the ocean continued its endless journey beneath the moonlight, far from any coastline. The night sky revealed something few people today will ever experience. There were no cities to brighten the horizon. No streetlights, no buildings, no airplanes crossing. Overhead, nothing competed with the stars. The sky seemed impossibly alive. Thousands upon thousands of stars filled the darkness from one horizon to the other, forming a glittering ceiling above the ship. For sailors, those stars were far more than beautiful scenery. They were navigation. They were direction. They were survival. Long before GPS or modern instruments existed, sailors trusted the heavens to guide them across oceans that had no roads, no signs, and no landmarks. Many spent countless hours memorizing constellations, learning how each one shifted with the seasons and how the position of certain stars could reveal both direction and latitude. Night after night, those same stars watched over them as they drifted to sleep. For some sailors, the final thing they saw before closing their eyes wasn't the wooden ceiling above their hammock. It was the night sky itself. But peaceful nights weren't the only challenge waiting. Beyond the horizon, after spending weeks surrounded by nothing but water, another enemy slowly crept into every sailor's mind. It couldn't be seen. It couldn't be heard, and yet it affected nearly everyone aboard. Boredom, not the ordinary boredom we experience while waiting in line or sitting through a long meeting. This was something much deeper. Every morning began almost exactly like the one before. Wake up, report for duty, adjust the sails, check the rigging, scrub the deck, eat a simple meal, return to work, watch the horizon, sleep, repeat. The next day looked almost identical. Then the next, then the next. Weeks blurred into months until it became surprisingly difficult to remember whether a particular event had happened yesterday or 3 weeks earlier. Modern life constantly surrounds us with new experiences, different streets, different conversations, different news, different places. A sailor crossing the Atlantic experienced almost none of that. The same faces, the same voices, the same ship, the same endless blue horizon, stretching in every direction. Every sunrise seemed familiar. Every sunset looked almost identical. The ocean became both their entire world and a prison with invisible walls. During long, quiet evenings, when the ship drifted peacefully beneath calm skies and conversation slowly faded away, many sailors found themselves alone with their thoughts. They remembered home, the streets they once walked every day, the markets they used to visit, the smell of bread baking in the morning, the laughter of children playing outside, the sound of church bells echoing across their town. Simple memories suddenly became priceless. Some wondered how much had changed while they were away. Had new houses been built? Had friends moved on? Had children grown taller? Would the people waiting for them even recognize them when they finally returned? Many voyages lasted 6 months. Some lasted a year. Others stretched even longer. Life continued on land while sailors remained suspended in the middle of an ocean that seemed to have no end. It was during sleep that many finally escaped. Dreams carried them home for a few precious hours each night. They walked familiar roads again. They embraced loved ones. They sat once more at family tables. Some sailors later described waking from those dreams with genuine confusion. For a brief moment, they truly believed they had made it home. Then, reality quietly returned. The slow creaking of the ship, the smell of salt, the gentle rocking beneath the hammock, the voices of other sailors nearby. They opened their eyes and found themselves exactly where they had always been, still surrounded by the sea. Dreams held another kind of importance as well. Centuries ago, long before psychology or neuroscience attempted to explain them, many sailors believed dreams carried messages. A dream might be a warning, a promise, a sign of good fortune, or a prediction of disaster waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Life at sea encouraged such beliefs. The ocean was unpredictable. The weather changed without warning. A calm morning could become a deadly storm before nightfall. In a world filled with uncertainty, people naturally searched for meaning wherever they could find it. So sailors shared their dreams just as readily as they shared stories about distant ports and dangerous seas. Whether those dreams truly meant anything remains impossible to know. But one thing is certain, they gave hope to men living farther from home than most of us can even imagine. Hope, however, wasn't enough to keep a ship alive. No matter how beautiful the stars were, no matter how comforting a dream felt, morning always arrived, bringing another day of hard labor. The sea demanded constant attention. A tired sailor wasn't simply uncomfortable. He was dangerous. Fatigue slowed his reactions. It weakened his judgment. It made climbing the rigging more hazardous, handling heavy ropes more difficult, and responding to sudden commands far less reliable. One exhausted crew member could place an entire ship at risk. The best captains understood this long before anyone studied sleep scientifically. To them, rest wasn't a reward. It was part of survival, whenever possible. They made sure every sailor received at least some opportunity to recover before the next watch began. Despite the harsh conditions, sailors still searched for small pieces of comfort wherever they could find them. Many kept a few personal belongings tucked safely beside their hammocks. A folded letter from home, a small hand-carved wooden cross, a family keepsake, a hand-drawn portrait, perhaps a ribbon given to them before the voyage began. These objects held almost no practical value, yet emotionally, they meant everything. They reminded sailors that somewhere beyond the endless horizon, another life was waiting. A place where the ground never moved beneath their feet. A place filled with familiar voices instead of crashing waves. A place they desperately hoped to see again during especially warm nights. Sleeping below deck became almost unbearable. The humid air settled inside the ship until breathing itself felt difficult whenever conditions allowed. Many sailors chose to sleep out on deck instead. There, beneath the open sky, the experience was completely different. Cool sea air drifted gently across the ship. The endless rhythm of waves created a sound unlike anything on land. Not loud, not violent, just steady, almost hypnotic. Above them stretched one of the most spectacular skies on Earth. Far from cities and artificial light, the stars seemed almost close enough to touch. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a glowing river of light. Shooting stars occasionally flashed across the darkness before disappearing forever. For many sailors, these became the moments they remembered most. Years later, when writing journals or telling stories to their families, they often spoke less about famous ports and more about those quiet nights in the middle of nowhere. Just the ship, the sea, the stars, and complete silence. In those moments, the ocean no longer felt like an enemy, it felt ancient. Timeless, almost peaceful, but every experienced sailor knew better than to trust the peace. The sea could change its mood with astonishing speed. A gentle breeze could strengthen within minutes, small waves could become towering swells. Dark clouds could erase the stars before anyone realized what was happening. Every sailor learned to watch the sky almost as carefully as the water itself. The first warning signs were often subtle. The air became heavier, the wind shifted direction, clouds gathered silently along the horizon, birds disappeared, the surface of the ocean changed. Then came the first powerful gust. The sails snapped violently. The ship leaned farther than usual. Loose ropes were to cross the deck. Voices grew louder. Orders echoed from the captain. Within moments, every sailor understood exactly what was coming. Another storm. The peaceful night was over. Sleep would have to wait. Again, lanterns were lit. Crew members rushed to their stations. Some climbed into the towering rigging despite the ship pitching violently beneath them. Others fought to shorten the sails before the strengthening wind held them apart. Heavy equipment was secured. Cargo was checked. Every movement had to be fast, every decision mattered. Because once the storm reached full strength, there would be no room for hesitation. Hours passed, sometimes an entire night, sometimes an entire day. The crew remained, soaked by rain and seawater, muscles aching from constant effort. No one complained. There wasn't time. Every ounce of energy went toward keeping the ship afloat. And somehow, even after all of that, the ocean still wasn't finished with them. When the storm finally began to lose its strength, something remarkable happened. The screaming wind slowly faded. The towering waves settled into long rolling swells. The sky, little by little, began to open once again. For the first time in hours sometimes, after an entire day of relentless struggle, the crew could finally breathe. But victory didn't feel exciting. It felt exhausting. Not the kind of exhaustion we experience after a busy day at work. This was something much deeper. Every muscle ached. Every movement felt heavy. Hands were blistered from hauling ropes. Legs trembled from fighting to stay upright on a deck that had refused to stand still. Eyes burned from hours without proper sleep. Adrenaline had kept them moving. Now that it was gone, their bodies demanded only one thing: rest. Many sailors didn't even make it back to their hammocks. Some collapsed beside cords of rope. Others leaned against cargo crates and fell asleep almost instantly. A few rested wherever they happened to be standing when the captain finally announced that the worst had passed. The body simply refused to wait any longer. Sleep arrived the moment it was allowed, surprisingly. Storms weren't always the greatest source of frustration at sea. Many sailors feared something else almost as much: complete calm. When the wind disappeared entirely, sailing ships became prisoners of the ocean. The sails hung motionless. The rigging stopped singing. The ship drifted aimlessly over gentle swells, making little or no progress. Hours slipped by, then another day, sometimes several days. Nothing changed to modern eyes. Calm water looks peaceful. To sailors whose survival depended on the wind, it could be deeply unsettling. Waiting tested the mind in ways hard work never could. With nothing urgent to repair and nowhere to sail until the wind returned, time seemed to slow almost to a standstill. To fight the boredom, sailors found work wherever they could. They patched torn clothing, repaired worn-out boots, cleaned tools, sharpened knives, practiced tying complicated knots, retold old stories for the 100th time. Some even invented games simply to make another hour pass. Then night arrived once again. They climbed back into their hammocks, hoping tomorrow's sunrise would finally bring fresh wind. Months spent aboard a moving ship gradually changed the human body in surprising ways. Without consciously thinking about it, sailors developed extraordinary balance. Their feet automatically adjusted to every roll of the deck. Their knees bent instinctively before the ship even finished leaning. Their muscles anticipated movements that newcomers never saw coming. Even during sleep, their bodies quietly compensated for the ship's endless motion. Eventually, walking across a rolling deck became easier than walking across solid ground. That strange transformation became obvious after returning home. Many sailors described lying in their own beds and feeling something impossible. The mattress seemed to rise and fall beneath them. The room felt as though it were gently rocking. Some even reached out, convinced they were still surrounded by the sea. The sensation sometimes lasted for days, occasionally for weeks. Today, we know this phenomenon as land sickness or mouthy debarkment, a lingering illusion of motion that some people experience after spending long periods at sea. Even after leaving the ocean behind, the ocean continued to live inside them. Yet perhaps the greatest challenge sailors faced wasn't physical at all. It was isolation. Centuries ago, crossing an ocean meant disappearing from the world. Once the coastline vanished behind the horizon, so did every connection to home. There were no letters arriving midway through the voyage. No newspapers. No radio. No messages. No way of knowing whether families were safe. No way of hearing joyful news or heartbreaking news. The world continued without them. For months, they existed inside a tiny floating world surrounded by an endless sea. Because of that, friendships aboard ship became incredibly powerful. The men sleeping only a few feet apart shared far more than work. They trusted one another with their lives. They endured storms together, shared meals together, laughed together, suffered together. They became something closer to family than ordinary co-workers. Late at night, before exhaustion finally claimed them, conversations often drifted toward home. One sailor spoke about the wife waiting for him at the harbor. Another remembered his father's workshop. Someone else described the smell of bread fresh from the oven or the narrow streets of the town where he grew up. Each story carried everyone else home for just a few moments. Then, little by little, the voices faded. One hammock stopped moving, then another. One sailor drifted asleep, then the next, until only the gentle breathing of the crew remained. Outside, the ship continued its lonely voyage beneath a sky filled with stars. The sea whispered softly against the hull, and somewhere beyond that endless darkness, a new dawn was already waiting. But even after surviving violent storms, endless boredom, crushing exhaustion, and months of isolation, there was still one thing capable of waking even the most experienced sailor in an instant. Not the wind, not the waves, but something far more mysterious. The unknown that waited beyond the darkness of the open sea. Night in the middle of the open ocean was unlike any darkness most of us will ever experience. Even in the most remote places on land, there is usually some reminder that other people exist. A distant farmhouse, the glow of a village on the horizon, a passing car, the faint sound of a train somewhere far away. But hundreds of miles from shore, there was nothing. No lights, no voices, no signs of civilization. Only darkness stretching endlessly in every direction on clear nights when the moon was full. Its reflection painted a shimmering silver road across the surface of the sea. It seemed to stretch forever, disappearing into the horizon where the ocean met the sky. It was one of the most breathtaking sights a sailor could ever witness. But when clouds covered the moon, everything changed. The sea became almost invisible. The horizon vanished, water and sky blended into a single ocean of darkness. Sometimes it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. It was during moments like these that many sailors woke suddenly from their sleep, not because of an actual danger, not because someone had shouted, but because of an overwhelming feeling that is difficult to describe. Imagine opening your eyes and realizing that above you are millions of stars. Below you are thousands of feet of cold, silent water, and in every direction lies an emptiness so vast that the human mind struggles to comprehend it. For many sailors, that realization alone was enough to steal sleep. Perhaps that is why life at sea became filled with stories and legends. The imagination grows stronger when the world around you is unknown. Nearly every ship carried its own collection of tales. Stories about mysterious vessels appearing through thick fog before vanishing without a trace. Stories of sailors who claimed to have seen strange shapes gliding across the water beneath the moonlight. Stories of unexplained lights dancing over distant waves. Whether any of those stories were true mattered less than the role they played. It gave the crew something to discuss during long nights, something to wonder about, something to fear together. Most of the time, however, reality was far less mysterious. The sounds that startled sailors awake usually had perfectly ordinary explanations. A rope tightening as the wind shifted, a larger wave striking the hull harder than the ones before it, a wooden beam expanding as moisture soaked deeper into the ship. Experienced sailors eventually learned every sound their vessel could make. They knew the difference between ordinary creaks and genuine warning signs, just as someone today recognizes the familiar sounds inside their own home. Sailors came to know every groan, every crack, every vibration of their ship. If something sounded unusual, they noticed immediately. That was one of the greatest differences between sleeping at sea and sleeping on land. A sailor never completely disconnected from his surroundings. Even while asleep, a small part of his mind remained awake, listening, waiting, ready to react if danger appeared. That quiet awareness became one of the reasons so many crews survived voyages that lasted for months across dangerous oceans. As the weeks turned into months, the ship gradually stopped feeling like transportation. It became an entire world. Time itself became strangely difficult to measure. The days looked alike. The work remained the same. The ocean never seemed to end. The horizon stayed exactly where it had always been. Sometimes sailors joked that they had been sailing forever. Then, one ordinary morning, everything changed. A voice suddenly echoed from high above. Land ahead. Every sailor looked toward the horizon. At first, there was almost nothing to see, only a tiny dark shape in the distance, so small that many wondered whether it was only another cloud. But minute by minute, the shape grew larger. The outline became clearer. Steep cliffs emerged from the morning mist, then hills, then trees. Soon, rooftops became visible. Smoke rose into the sky. The unmistakable signs of human life slowly returned. After weeks or even months of seeing nothing except water, the sight of land felt almost unreal. Relief spread across the deck. Smiles appeared on faces that had grown weary from endless days at sea. Voices became louder. Laughter returned. For many sailors, this was the moment they had imagined every single night before falling asleep. Eventually, the ship entered the harbor. Another long voyage had come to an end, yet the journey left behind something much greater than memories. The sailor who stepped ashore was no longer the same person who had departed months before. He had learned to sleep while the world moved beneath him, to rest despite constant noise, to wake in an instant whenever the sea demanded it, to endure loneliness, uncertainty, storms, and endless horizons without giving up. Above all, he had learned a lesson that generations of sailors passed down through history. Human beings are capable of adapting to circumstances that seem impossible at first. Given enough time, even the strangest place can begin to feel like home. So tonight, as you settle into your own quiet bed, take a moment to imagine that small wooden ship, still making its slow journey across a dark and endless ocean. Above it, a sky overflowing with stars. Below it, the gentle rhythm of the waves. And inside, dozens of exhausted sailors asleep in their swaying hammocks, allowing the sea itself to carry them toward another unknown sunrise. For centuries, this wasn't an adventure. It wasn't a legend. It was simply everyday life. And perhaps that's the most extraordinary part of the story. The impossible became ordinary. But before we end tonight's journey, there's one final thought that's worth holding onto. When we look back at history, it's easy to admire the great discoveries, the famous explorers, and the ships that connected continents. We remember the names of captains. We celebrate the voyages that changed the world. Yet history is often built upon much quieter moments, moments that rarely appear in paintings or history books. A sailor closing his eyes after 18 exhausting hours of work. A hammock gently rocking with the motion of the sea. A whispered conversation about home before sleep finally takes over. A folded letter carefully tucked beneath a pillow made from rolled-up clothing, the simple hope of seeing another sunrise. For the thousands of ordinary sailors who crossed the world's oceans, these moments mattered just as much as reaching their destination. Every peaceful night's sleep was a small victory. Every storm survived was another chance to continue the voyage. Every morning they woke meant another day closer to home. Many of those sailors would never become famous. Their names were never written into history. They left behind no monuments, no statues, no portraits hanging in museums. Yet without them, many of history's greatest voyages would never have happened. They were the ones who climbed the rigging in freezing rain, who repaired torn sails in the middle of violent storms, who stood watch while everyone else slept, who trusted one another with their lives, night after night, month after month. And somehow, despite living in one of the most unpredictable environments on Earth, they discovered something extraordinary. Human beings are far more adaptable than we often believe. What seems impossible at first can eventually become routine. The constant rocking of a ship, the endless sound of waves, the loneliness of the open ocean, the uncertainty of tomorrow. Even sleep itself changed to match the world around them. Perhaps that's why their story still fascinates us today, because it isn't really just a story about sailors. It's a story about resilience, about endurance, about the incredible ability of ordinary people to adjust to extraordinary circumstances. The ocean demanded everything they had: their strength, their patience, their courage, their trust, sometimes even their lives. And yet, generation after generation, they kept sailing. Night after night, countless wooden ships crossed dark oceans beneath silent skies. Inside them, tired crews climbed into simple canvas hammocks, closed their eyes, and surrendered to sleep while the sea gently carried them toward another unknown horizon. Somewhere above, the stars continued their ancient journey across the sky. Somewhere below, the endless ocean rolled on exactly as it had for millions of years. And somewhere ahead, another sunrise was waiting, so the next time you lie down in a warm, quiet bed that never moves, perhaps you'll remember those sailors. Men who found rest where most of us would find only discomfort, who learned to sleep surrounded by noise instead of silence, who turned a tiny wooden ship into a home floating between the sea and the stars. Their world has long disappeared. The great wooden sailing ships have mostly faded into history, but the lesson they left behind remains timeless. The human spirit has an extraordinary capacity to adapt. Sometimes, the greatest victories are not dramatic battles or famous discoveries. Sometimes, they're simply the quiet moments when we learn to live with circumstances we once believed we could never endure. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey across the oceans of the past. If you enjoyed this story, I hope you'll join me again for another journey into history where the smallest questions often reveal the most fascinating answers. Until next time, sleep well, and let the waves carry your imagination somewhere extraordinary.